Let's go. Welcome back. We made it. Season 2. Episode 1. Gargants can't take endless spells. I'm Sam Morgan and I'm coming at you live from Ghur Community College. In today's episode, we're going to talk about life. We're going to talk about Age of Sigmar. We're going to talk about the not so recent AoS Worlds event in Prague. It's been a minute, three things probably been going on which have stymied my time and my interest in the channel. To be frank, we had some nasty stuff play out late last year, which sort of took the wind out of my sails a little bit. Suffice to say, that's a reflection on those people. So I think we'll park it and we'll move on. My mental health, we don't back away from that stuff as, white, middle-aged male. What we do is we don't seek help until it's too late or until it's fixed. But yeah, suffice to say that stuff is also on the mend. And I think I'll probably, rather than give you the 15-minute sobbing synopsis that I've just recorded, put a little meme in here. My mental health has been the worst. And then the other thing is just the focus on Worlds. So had a big team tournament, very much committed to doing as well as I could in that environment, both individually and collectively as part of a team. And it really monopolised my hobby time. If I had a choice between doing a podcast or getting a practice game in, or watching games on TTS or discussing games in the various team chats we had going, I'd certainly privilege and preference the focus on Worlds, and would not change that. Would not change that for a second, because it was certainly worth it. Moving forward, what are we going to do? Look, I've spoken previously about this desire to post content more regularly. This time I'm actually going to give that a proper go. And I know in order to be successful on YouTube, you have to put together quality content. Ideally, that content is evergreen, so it's stuff that people are going to want to come back to and look at various points in time. So for instance, you might jump on and look at a painting tutorial, which is 10 years old. And then if you wind back the clock 10 years, I think that's the end of 7th edition Warhammer Fantasy Battle. No one's interested in your review of the cooked Dark Elves or Vampire Accounts books from the end of 7th. They're not getting any traffic now. So there's a notion there of you want the quality to be, the content of the quality to be exceptional. You want the focus to be on evergreen topics, or if it's contemporary, to have relevant information like news or reviewing a new book or something along those lines. So with that in mind, today we'll primarily focus on an event that was over a month ago with a GHB, which is now completely irrelevant. And it's my introspective, I suppose, on an event and my time away. But moving forward, I would like to kickstart the channel with some quality content. I've got collaborations lined up to sort of support that with far more talented and prodigious people than myself. I'm going to sort of ride on their coattails. I would like to refocus on doing list stuff again as well. I really enjoyed that, and this will be the last time you get a high school style PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to flip over to the streaming setup next. The only reason that I'm not doing the stream this time around is because it is freezing, and I've chosen to work in the room where it is both warm and quiet, as opposed to where the streams will happen, where there's better lighting, but there's also a heater blaring at the moment. So we're gonna move to that stream on camera style, which is both exciting and terrifying for me. And I'm going to implement some stuff around painting and hobby, because I am very much a holistic Warhammer person. I love the narrative, the lore. I love painting and building things. I love paying other people to paint and build pretty things for me. And obviously I'm really into playing. So I'd like the channel to explore all of the aspects that I enjoy, rather than just that narrow slice, which is janky builds and whatnot. All right. Oh man, I don't know if other people have this experience, if other people have this experience as well, but I left the event. I did terribly at Worlds. I really am quite disappointed in my personal results. There's a variety of reasons that I did poorly, which we'll explore across the course of this episode. But it's an interesting thought process. We're now 5 or 6 weeks removed from the event, and you start going, my opponent got lucky, and that was the determining factor in a game. And then you start to think, well, you know what? I didn't actually have the best of luck myself. And then finally you come around and you realize, well, your opponent actually played really well. This is a very high-end event with a lot of tryhards. This is like the highest concentration of Warhammer tryhards you're ever going to find under one roof. So you go, well, they played well. And then you go, you know what? I could have played better. There are things within my game that I could have done differently. I could have exercised control, and that would have changed the results. And then ultimately you land where you probably should have started, and it's who cares? It really doesn't matter. It's all about those friends that you made along the way. Shout out to some of my boys here, so Luke, Toby, and Stuart, the Iron Godsman. I've been ruminating, and I guess it's been illuminating. I won't be circumbambulating. I'm focused on next year. I won't be abdicating. I'll definitely be going back. The next 12 months is all about rejuvenating. All right, that's probably enough wordplay there. It's time for some accumulating. Sorry for that. I think that the global cost of living crisis is starting to get to me. I'm going a bit crazy. I don't know if you remember, but air used to be free at the petrol station. Now it costs $5. You know why? Inflation. All right, the pairings minigame. So at the start of each round at Worlds, there was a game within a game. And both teams would nominate both the captain and a coach or one of the players, and they'd sort of work out who was going to be playing against who. And the way that they would do that is you would be aware of the 4 scenarios that were being played in the round, and you'd work through those. And in the first scenario, each team puts out a lead, puts out someone that's going to play in that particular scenario, and then the opposing team is able to choose 2 potential opponents, and then you go back and choose. So just as an example, I'm playing First Prince. Matt, my captain, leads me. The other team say, First Prince, we'd like to throw Stormcast and Nurgle at that. We then get to have a look at that and work out, well, which do I want to play? And then we have to consider, well, what are all the downstream implications of me choosing Nurgle or Stormcast? And the approach that we took this year, this was our first year at Worlds, was a real risk mitigation approach. So we would, across a team, there's 8 guys in our team, there's 8 players in our team, we're playing against 8 players on the opposing team. We'd have a potential of 64 different matchups just based on the matrices there. And then potentially there's 4 different missions that those players could go into, and then there's also terrain density. There's either a light terrain table or a heavy terrain table, and obviously depending on the nature of your list, you might preference one of those over the other. So ultimately, I think that probably, without doing the maths, leads you into thousands of permutations every round. And to be frank, we hadn't done the work up front. We hadn't done our due diligence in terms of working through our pairings model and our pairings approach. And that really only left us with one reasonable option, and that was to take a risk mitigation approach. So we would evaluate the other team, and we'd say, of this team, which of our players has the highest number of red matchups, who has the worst set of matchups, because if we lead with them, we can then mitigate the future red pairings that we're going to receive. So say as a team, out of our 64 matchups, we might have 15 reds, right? If one player has 5 of those reds, you've dropped it down to 10 for the rest of the team by leading them, then if the player that they put up against you is like Beasts of Chaos or is Nurgle or is something of that nature, that might have 5 or 6 bad matchups across the rest of our team. So of our original 15 reds, there's a chance that we clear out like 11 of those. And then that leaves us in a really strong position for the back 7 matches. So you hear people talking about this as bussing, like throwing someone under the bus. So what we attempted to do was to maximize our potential number of good matchups by taking an early hit and getting our reds off the spreadsheet, so to speak. So that is a safe but ultimately limited approach. So what that means is that we're not necessarily in a position to bully our opponents. We can't create a series of matchups where they're sort of on the back foot. It's more a case of us getting rid of the bad stuff early, giving them the early advantage in the pairings game, and then in the back half of the pairings, trying to reel them in there. And over the course of the weekend, we played six opponents, and I would say the 3 rounds that we won, we beat our opponents in the pairings process, and the 3 rounds that we lost, which were ultimately to the 3 teams on the podium, those teams outperformed us in terms of the pairings process, and that was around their strategy, and that was around, I think, the level of work that they'd put in ahead of time. And certainly moving forward next year, there's a real opportunity for us to improve in the pairings game. And as a team, we had a growth mindset. We went there and we said, we know we can do better, we know we can improve, and we're really open to improving our systems and ensuring that we've done everything we can before the event to maximize our likelihood of success at the event. So we're cool with saying that, like, it wasn't the best model. Matt, who was our captain, did a tremendous job given the level of analysis that he had to do live in real time and then go and play his games. Like, there are some countries where they've got coaches and stuff. The players aren't actually involved. They're at arm's length, and certainly I can see some benefits to that. The other thing for us was around data accuracy. So me, as an example, I listed a lot of matchups on the basis of how those matchups play in singles, and the team lists were oriented or skewed to the extent that they weren't representative of singles. So I played an Iron Jaws player. I'd played Iron Jaws quite a lot in practice, beaten them consistently, hadn't lost to Iron Jaws in practice. And then at the event, my opponent did a number of things that you wouldn't see in singles. He took a 1900 point list. You wouldn't see that. He took a 1-drop. I think typically you wouldn't see that. Typically, I think you want a Warlord battalion for the Iron Jaws. They're thirsty for command points. They want that extra command point. They want the Destroyer on the Maw Crusher, and then ideally that they'd like to sneak a wizard or a second wizard in there with the Arcane Tome. So they want that artifact so that they can cast Hand of Gork or whatever it's called to teleport around. And my opponent didn't have a teleport. He was a 1-drop, and his list played very differently to any that I'd faced in a singles environment, and that certainly caught me on the back foot. And then he played a really high risk game, so he charged at me turn 1, alphaed me, and his strategy was contingent on him getting smashing and bashing multiple times, which he did to a wound each time, and then his strategy was contingent on me not getting the double back. So within the first 15 minutes, he knew the outcome of our game, that he'd had a big win, but it was super high risk, like unnecessarily high risk in a singles context. But in a team's context, it meant the rest of his team knew within 15 minutes, as a team, we're already on 20. We're already on 20 points, and that means collectively across the rest of the 7 games, we might play a little bit more defensively now and still end up with a big round win overall. So that was, from my perspective, brilliant. That's a strategic intervention, right? That's the sort of thing where you've actually thought about the context of teams and played into that. And we certainly didn't do that. We had 8 very good singles lists, and we had 8 very competent players. So, there's the pairings element of things where you can potentially set up matchups and skew matchups in such a way that that you're getting good results. And then there's the talent on the table thing, and then there's uh, variance. So you can't control the variance, but you can control the other two. And the collective of those three things, I think, ultimately is what determines the winners overall and the winners in a given round. And having played against the podium, I would say Sweden were a fantastic hybrid of talent and prep and practice. I'd say based on my observations of the French team, they're obviously really good at playing the game, but I think their preparation stood out as being the best prepared in the whole event. And I think England, and this is to their credit, not to their detriment, I think England were the best players there, but weren't necessarily the best prepared or the best lists. That they'd solved some of the lists, like Jack's Nurgle list, he'd solved the Nurgle book. That was, in my mind, the perfect Nurgle build. Toby's Slaves to Darkness list, I think, was the perfect teams build. That they had some builds there that were brilliant, but I think their play is what put them in that first spot. And I think, you know, France's preparation, if there's some sort of, if we have a year where someone's as talented as England and as well prepared as France, that they'll win by the length of the straight. So yeah, I think this whole idea of strategic intervention is where I'd like our team to ultimately land, and that's around, you know the opposing lists, you know the missions, and you know the terrain density to an extent. And what that means is you can target your matchups into the scenario rather than the list. So you know these 4 missions are coming up. You know who your 4 leads are in those missions. Their lists are specifically built so that they can play into those and effectively play into those. And what that means is that your opponent can chase a green matchup in inverted commas, which is a green in terms of the various armies playing against each other. So it's typically or generically a good matchup, but ultimately it's actually not, because the scenario sets up in such a way that they can't win it. And a really good example of that is Apex Predators. So we had Stuart on Nurgle, and Nurgle's terrific in the meta generally speaking, but specifically in Apex Predators. They can effectively screen, and that they can get really durable characters onto those objectives, and they only need to survive till turn 3, and then they've auto won. If they outscore you to turn 3, the game is over, and then if they hang on for turn 4, it's a large win, and if they hang on for all 5 turns, it's a 20. So you could set up a list in such a way for Apex Predators where there might be a bad matchup for Nurgle, and that, what might that be? That might be like Seraphon, for example. A Seraphon player might like the matchup. Although the Seraphon player is typically green into Nurgle, Nurgle is green in Apex Predators, and that green is the more relevant one in the context of the round. So we can do a better job of that. And I know for me personally, I hadn't played all of the scenarios at the event. They played everyone out of the book, and some of them I think are substandard. So you don't play them in practice, you don't play them in singles tournaments, and that was my own folly. I should have definitely played multiple games of each scenario. So that's another thing where we can improve. But you know what they say, next year we'll be better prepared. So we'll be like that Scarecrow. He won an award. He was outstanding in his field. All right, 6 months. 4,320 hours, 100 plus practice games, and the worst list at the event. So let's talk about this. There's only so much value in moping, right? So we better just dissect it and hopefully protect someone else from my mistakes in the future. In the lead up to this, I had played 3 events with the Legion of the First Prince, and I'd gone 4-1, 5-0, 4-1, and I felt reasonably comfortable in every single tournament. When I'd look at the players that are up the top and I'd look at their lists, I'd feel reasonably comfortable going into them. And the way that the list sort of played was like this onion. There were these layers, right?
Okay, ogres are like onions.
They stink?
Yes. No.
Oh, they make you cry?
No.
Oh, you leave them out in the sun, they get all brown, start sprouting little white hairs.
No. Layers. Onions have layers. Ogres have layers. Onions have layers. You get it. We both have layers.
the Furies are out the front, and then in the middle of the onion you've got Be'lakor and the Demon Prince, and they're able to skip over the top of any screens and go and be really impactful. I've got the 30 Plague Bearers there are incredibly resilient, and then I've got, 9 units as a starting point. 9 units as a starting point that Be'lakor can return models to in both my turn and my opponent's turn in the Battle Shock phase. And that's at the end of the Battle Shock phase, so you could do some funky stuff with your coherency. And it's complemented well by the Plague Bearers, who can bring back models on the roll of a 1. For their Battle Shock. So there's a whole heap of stuff going on in terms of resilience there, and those Plague Bearers are negs to hit in the shooting phase, and then the Mask has a 6-inch pile in, and she can run and charge, so she's got a really good threat range, and then a 4+ ward and healing on her ward scroll, so she's able to tag things in. The Sloppity Bile Piper was a relatively late addition to the army, and he brought along the totem, so that I had the additional aura, the 18-inch aura that Be'lakor gives, and then his, because those Furies don't have champions and they're not elite. And then I had the Burning Head in the list, primarily because it gives me a little bit of splash mortal wounds, and it sometimes is able to help. There are instances where the combination of an Arcane Bolt and a Stomp just aren't quite enough, and the Burning Head, in addition to those two, is enough to kill stuff like an Achillean King, for instance. So the Burning Head I did find to be useful in practice. I went with Predator's Domain because it's teams, and there's 2 of each grand strategy available across the team. That was the one I had to sort of land on, and theoretically, Predator's Domain, which is last GHB, so it's largely irrelevant now, but that was holding terrain, and that was one of the few that didn't say starting army, so it meant that summoned units could also hold the terrain. So yeah, you start with those 9 units, maybe Be'lakor summons 30 more Plague Bearers. Generally I was summoning Demonettes because small footprint and the ability to reroll to charge on the War Scroll, and then pumping out 21 attacks. That's a nice combination for being aggressive in the backfield. But yeah, look, ultimately this list, which I did particularly well in singles with, really, really fell over in a team's context. There were a couple of issues with it. All right, first and foremost, I didn't get to use the Burning Head. So when we submitted our lists, we drafted them all on our team Discord, and then migrated them over to the template that was provided by the event. And what that meant was that in 2 instances, mine and our Stormcast player Dave's, the bottom line of the text, for whatever reason, didn't migrate from one format to the other. So far more impactful for poor Dave. He lost the Thunderbolt Volley, which we copped a 5-point penalty as a team to have added back into the list. But yeah, I missed out on the Burning Head, and then I ended up being inspired 1970 with a 1950 point list. So that's on me. I could have triple checked that the list was right. I went through the list, and obviously all the units were in there, and I missed that the Burning Head wasn't there. So that did impact me. Another thing that impacted me quite significantly at the event was the terrain, in terms of both the density of terrain. I hadn't practiced with the terrain maps enough. The density of the terrain and the volume of terrain, which was either garrisonable or impassable. And what that meant is that the Khorne Demon Prince's special rule, which is typically his strength, and is what's costing you in the hunt, is giving up a victory point because he's got that particular command ability, was largely redundant. With the impassable, what you can actually do is move chaff units like the Mask and like a unit of 6 Furies in between 2 pieces of impassable in such a way that it creates a choke point. And ultimately it's better. It creates a really small footprint where your opponent can get models into you, and with both the Mask, who has a 6-inch pile in and can fly when she piles in, and can pile in 6 inches, so can can move 10 inches when she's retreated and then pile into something, within 16 of where she was fighting in combat. And the Furies can retreat in combat and have fly, so that they don't mind being in the choke point either. Ultimately, the terrain impacted the Demon Prince really significantly. In Australia, we play with a lot of area terrain. There was none, like literally none, on the tables that I played on. So he was never just getting a +1 save for free. It was always costing me a resource, whether that was a command point, whether that was a Mystic Shield, or using his finest hour defensively rather than aggressively. And that meant that he was basically completely worthless in this particular event. In all of my practice events, I would have told you that he was the most important model, but if I had my time over, he would certainly be the epitome, because I needed that additional damage dealer, I needed that additional spellcaster. I would have loved rerolls a number of times across the event, and also she's obviously got some durability built into her scroll, with the opponent can't strike her unless she's fought, and the 2+ ward against mortals, and there's a whole host of things going on there that in the particular event, with the terrain the way that it was, and with the lists the way that they were constructed, she would have been a far, far better choice. Equally, the next guy on the list, the Sloppity Bile Piper, as nice as it was to be able to block some pile-ins, he probably wasn't necessary, and probably could have just been an additional 10 Plague Bearers, because those things are incredible. They're so durable, and this is only with a 6-up ward. I mean, in Nurgle, I think the Nurgle book is really well placed to pivot into a number of different metas, because the units within it are just so versatile. They can do so many things so well. So they're spoiled for choices. And I love that book because it's the perfect illustration of how little the talking heads, myself included, know about Warhammer, 'cause when it came out, they're also critical of it. So, look, the other problem with this list is that it's a generalist list. There are some things that I've done here quite specifically to be able to fight against a range of other armies. What I should have done is conceded that some matchups would be bad matchups and that I would lose them quite heavily, and instead specialized the build and focused it more acutely in the particular scenarios and the particular matchups that I wanted, because you've got control here in this team's environment. This is a singles list, not a teams list, and that's on me. And then the final thing was the battalion choices. So I was double battle regiment and a 2-drop. In Australia, I think the 1-drop isn't as prevalent, not even close to as prevalent as it is in Europe and in teams specifically. And 2-drop was no man's land. You had 2-drops and you had builds that were the greater than 2. And the reason that I stuck with the 2 in the lead up was the rationale was the Nurgle with the Great Unclean One and 2 of the Maggot Lords is going to be 3, and then a number of the popular Soulblight Gravelord builds were also 3 or 4, depending on whether they took multiple monsters or whether they had the big blocks in Hunters, which they are sometimes prone to doing. And I wanted to be stronger into those 2 specific matchups, and that was to my folly. I absolutely should have been Hunters and Warlords. The Plague Bearers being in Hunters, or the 12 Furies being in Hunters, is really significant. The absence of the additional command point from Warlord was really significant. And that 4th character, the Mask there, she wants to be in the Vanguard, because I had turns in this event where I didn't have my Warlord command point and I didn't have the free 6-inch run from the Mask, and I wanted to do 2 things, and my resource management meant I had to choose between them. I wanted to turn the Slaves to Darkness Demon Prince command on, the Blood Slick Ground to slow down my opponent, and I wanted to run 6 with the Mask. So I was left with a choice where, regardless of which direction I took, I was dissatisfied, and that was obviously very frustrating and well within my control. And I played 5 1-drops. I much would have rather given them no information. I much would have rather deployed 6 Furies and said, please put your whole army down. That would be so much more valuable. And then the one army that I played against, and I'll talk about this later, but the one army that I played against where they weren't a 1-drop, Liara from Sweden, she out deployed me to such an extent that it didn't matter. Like, it wouldn't have mattered if I was 1,000 drop. She kicked my ass. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that. And then, yeah, look, the Predator's Domain. So, Predator's Domain was not problematic, but it was suboptimal, and I should have gone with the Hold the Line. And I had Hold the Line for the vast majority of practice. And then in the lead up to list submission, we had 3 players on Hold the Line. I dropped Hold the Line, and then subsequently one of the other players dropped Hold the Line. So we went to the event with only one player on Hold the Line, and that again was on me. I should have swapped back. From Predator's Domain to Hold the Line, just for that incremental advantage. And not only the incremental advantage of it being a battle tactic that I'm more likely to get, it's a battle tactic which should skew a good player's approach, because what they should do is then say, okay, I want to kill those plague bearers and invest resources in them. And if they're investing resources in the plague bearers, then the mask and Be'lakor and the Demon Prince, or the Epitome in the revised version, those things aren't being focused on, and they're really central to the way that the list plays. So by making the opponent prioritize something that's less impactful over the course of the game, by making them prioritize that's also beneficial for me. So there's dual benefit of swapping the grand strategy there, and you know, this is the sort of learnings you take out of these things. You need to have a level of attention to detail, which from my personal perspective is significantly higher than the amount of thought I would put into a singles event. Anyway, all right. Oh, this joke's a bit blue. Where's Peter Pan's favorite place to eat out? Wendy's.
But we talking about practice, man. What are we talking about? Practice? We're talking about practice, man. We're talking about practice. We're talking about practice.
Talking about practice, oh my goodness. So here's a photo from the event. This gives you a sense of the terrain. So on this table, we've got 1, 2, 3 pieces of impassable, and then 2 garrisons, which effectively are also impassable. So we got 5 pieces of impassable, 2 of which are massive. And this is me playing against Toby Meadows from England in the hold 4 scenario. Toby is just a class act. He's a great representative for that community. And I'm pleased for him that he's a world champion. So me and Toby had a cracking game. It's the hold 4 scenario. He's running 2 units of Varangard, and then the rest are Zench Iron Golem. So a tough nut to crack. He made a mistake in this particular game. So he gave me first turn, which I think in this game you want to control the tempo of the game, and the way you do that is you maximize the chance of you controlling the priority moving from turns 2 into 3. So you want to go first in the first battle round, then you want to control who's going first or second in the second battle round, and you either want to be on for the double 2 into 3, because you can auto win at the end of 2, or you can go first in turn 2 again, and then be potentially on for control 2 into 3. So I think I've not played this enough, and that was my downfall. Toby gave me first. I didn't do anything of substance. I then gave him the double and was on for the double myself. And what I should have done is, going second in turn 2, I should have focused all my resources into that top right-hand objective here, where he's outnumbering me by like 2 models in the end. I'm already holding both of the bottom ones, because then if I win the priority 2 into 3, I give him the turn, and I remove the objective on the top left of this photo and auto win. And if I lose the priority and he gives me the turn, then I push my whole army into his top left and try and win the game that way. But instead, I split my forces in my turn 2, and that ultimately opened up the door for Toby to win. And this is one of those ones where I talked about there is a need to target particular scenarios, because this scenario, you get 20 points if you're holding all four. It is hard to get a 20 in a Worlds context. It's hard to pick up a 20, right? So if you know that each scenario gets played in 2 separate rounds and it gets played on 2 tables. So there is 4 opportunities for you to pick up a 20 here, 80 points on the table, if you skew your list so that it is particularly good in this scenario. So I don't know, I haven't given it enough consideration. I don't know what you do specifically to ensure that you're good at it. Maybe you practice it 30 times, so you've played it more than any other person at the event. Maybe you make small tweaks, so you've got stuff that can teleport and move. Whatever it is, there here is a massive disconnect between the way that I thought about how I should have played the game versus the on-table decisions I made. Like, I was still in this game. I still could have won this game. A couple of dice rolls here or there, and I pick up the 20 instead of Toby. But the reality is he played to his outs. Like, he played this game really well. And realistically, had he cast Metamorphosis and turned a unit of 6 Varangard into 30 guys, I was never winning. But I popped a nice 11 to stop his 10 to cast. But yeah, this is a really interesting scenario, and one that I think, is demonstrative of the difference between an event that plays all of the things out of the book versus an event that curates. So when you go to a five game event and there's 12 scenarios and there's 3 scenarios that are flavor of the month, you're effectively getting a rotation of 2 scenarios where most TOs attempt to include the least egregious of the remaining ones. And I'm running an event myself in August, and I've tried to include a spectrum of scenarios so that it will have some sort of impact on people's list building, and so that it will have some sort of impact as well, and just the way that the way that we use these GHBs, because I think it's a real shame if we're getting 12 scenarios a year and someone just arbitrarily decides, well, only 4 of those are playable or 5 of those are playable or whatever. Oh, I've got a good detective joke. Within minutes, the detective knew what the murder weapon was. It was a brief case. All right, fast hands. Yes, we've got a segment. We have a segment. So in this segment, I would like to quickly talk about topics of the day. So the first one is chess clocks. Chess clocks were used at the event. They were fine. In no way detrimentally affected my ability to socialize with opponents, and it kept me honest in terms of the time my army took to play with, and it kept my opponents honest. I have no issue with them. I thought they were great. Play of the day. Best play that I saw at the event. I was playing against Team Sweden. Liara was playing Daughters of Cain. We're playing the old Star Strike, which is where the objectives fall down in turn 2, and then 2 further objectives fall down in turn 3. And Liara set up the typical sort of castle. She had 10 witch elves spread out, taking up as much volume as they could. They were then touching a massive piece of impassable, and she had Marathi hidden at the back there. And I, as a counter deployment to that, deployed relatively centrally. I created a castle where Big Marathi was not going to be able to hurt me. The things that I value in my army were out of line of sight for the double shooting. I was a 2-drop. I was always going to give her first because I didn't want to take a double with a Mind Razor Big Marathi, or with Bow Snake shooting me 4 times. So I had set up in such a way that all of my key pieces were safe. And that I felt like I was in a really strong position in terms of being able to work to the left of the board or the right of the board, depending on where the stars struck. And I was able to threaten her bow snakes, which were obviously going to go in that castle. She's measuring up all of the various threat ranges, and I was feeling really confident. She then picked up the 20 bow snakes and put them in the furthest opposite corner of the board. I mean, the far, far back left-hand corner if I'm deployed in the bottom right. And I was like, what's going on here? And Marathi's still on the other side of the board, and I'm thinking, well, she's not going to double shoot them. What's the story? And then she deploys her whole army. She makes a second castle. She's got 2 castles on the board, a second castle around the bow snakes. Gets to the hero phase, and she goes, all right, so I'll mirror dance. Little Marathi moves her over to the bow snakes, shoots them, moves up. She's got the run, shoot, and charge buff hero, and gets the snakes into the middle of the board. And just, yeah, I don't know if you know that Alonzo Mourning meme, but that was it. I think she did that brilliantly. She did it on the fly, so she told me afterwards that wasn't her plan, but she saw an opening and she took it. And that's just one of those ones where I got outplayed. I have to say, well done. Tip my cap to her. Impassable and terrain maps. I personally am really comfortable with impassable terrain. I do think it could have been communicated earlier in terms of what the terrain maps were going to look like and what the terrain rules and the terrain pack were going to be. My preference would be for as much information to be readily available as early as possible, but I understand the limitations and challenges that TOs face as well. So at the end of the day, I don't think it was a problem per se. I do think Game Mat EU, who were the tournament sponsors, did a fantastic job furnishing the tables. I do think that their terrain is excellent supplementary terrain. I think it needs to also have some area terrain and some different configurations. But I understand again the limitations of running an enormous international event, and you certainly take what you can get. But from my personal perspective, I would have liked a greater variety of terrain. For instance, like ruins, ponds, that sort of stuff that's area terrain that actually can have a really significant impact on play. Conversely, maybe people in Europe and in that meta don't use that ever and would have disliked it. So I can't really say, but yeah, my fast hands are becoming slow hands here. Let's just say Impassable's fine, terrain maps are excellent. The DOK book, well. We got a problem here. So inequity is fine. Some armies are good at shooting. Some armies are good at combat. Some armies are good at magic. Inequity in and of itself is not a problem, but the nature of the inequity of this book is that they have access to battle tactics which are far too easy. Like, not a little bit too easy, far too easy. And then that obviously has a direct impact on the outcome of the game and their capacity to score. It's so easy for them to score points in what is seemingly a more challenging landscape. And I think that is a problem. I don't know how we address it. I think that there's a broader systemic problem around just having this additional information buried away in books and White Dwarf. But I think the DOK book, in terms of the units, the enhancements, the composition, the sub-factions, I really love it, and I've been list building and working around, but I think that the battle tactics are so easy to achieve that I probably will park my Daughters of Cain for the next few months and just see what happens with the upcoming books. If there's a general drop in difficulty, and we have an ecosystem or a meta where there's multiple books that are in that same range, then I'll probably play my Daughters. But for now, I think I'm just going to retire the Daughters and we'll get them out in a couple of months. Schedule. So I mentioned at the start of the show that I'm going to try and be more proactive. So I'm going to do this episode, obviously, if I ever hit the load button, and then I will do an episode probably in about a fortnight's time, which is going to be an army in a weekend. So that's going to be my first foray into painting, and I'm going to do a Middle Hammer army. So I've got this affinity with Middle Hammer. I just love it too much. So I'm gonna try and do that. And just, schedules aren't my strong point. I rolled into work at 10:30 the other day, and my boss was all, "You should have been here at 8." And I said, "Oh, why? What happened at 8?" All right, shout-outs. Let's talk through the team. Matt Tyrrell, captain, did a tremendous job. Played Ideneth, who I think are a middling faction, and he did brilliantly well with them. So massive kudos to him. He was really good whipping us into shape in the lead up to the event. And he did an excellent job in the pairings. He put a lot of pressure on the opponents because he was making his decisions so quickly and so comprehensively. I could see in some of, because I did the pairings with him sometimes, I could see in some of the pairings sort of matchups that the opponent's like, oh shit, we better get a move on. Dave Kerr, just an absolute gun. I didn't know Dave before the event. Like, obviously we'd been to the same tournaments or whatever, but being part of the same team, this guy is just a wizard. He just gets W. So super happy to have him on the team, and hopefully we get him back in future years. We had Alexander Cron. Plus Mama Cron, just a different unit, the Croninator. Really awesome to have him on the team as well. He was really good fun, and I had a good opportunity to hang out with him at SAGT and at the Vic GT this year, and really glad to have him as a mate now as well. Stuart McCowan, my man. So Stuart and I are from the same club, the same neck of the woods out here in Melbourne. He's in Japan at the moment, but he and I are kindred spirits when it comes to list building, and I very deliberately recommended Stu to the rest of the team because I knew he would have more oddball out there crazy stuff, and that would let me slip my Johnny Armies in. But sadly, I was mistaken because he took the filthiest Nurgle at the event. But yeah, awesome to have Stu there. Clarkie's another local for me. He's out in Geelong, and one of the guys, Fabs, did a speech at the end of the event, completely unnecessary. he cooked Clarkie. I won't repeat it here out of due respect for Michael. Talking about Fabs, much love to Fabs. He was this is again. I was saying Toby was gun. This is another just cracking reflection on the UK scene. Fabs is in the conversation for best player on the team, and he's in the conversation for best bloke, and that's pretty amazing. He's like, twins, Danny DeVito. He's like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and his best mate is Luke Morton. He's Danny DeVito. Peter the Orc Man. So Peter was on that last slide with me. And just a very quick story on the Sunday night, the Norwegian team, I think it was, came up to me, Peter, and Stu, and they gave us this bottle of brown stuff, and they said, "Oh, this is a traditional spirit from our country." And then they sort of left, and one of the guys was lingering, and he said, "Oh, I wouldn't drink that; it's poison." It's like, all right. I went off to have a shower because the Hotel of Horrors that we were staying in didn't have any hot water that day in the morning, so I wanted to have a shower before we headed out for the night. And I came back, like, I swear, 15 minutes later, and over half the bottle was gone. Stuart was now best friends with the Game Mat EU guys, like, that they had formed a bond, a relationship far quicker than would otherwise be possible. And Peter was relentless in telling me that this wasn't his first rodeo and that he wasn't drunk. I reckon he must have told me like 4 times, to the point that I was like, all right, bye. That was the last time I've seen him in my life, by the way. And yeah, it was good fun. All right, and just some other shout outs. Minimag Trey were incredibly generous and sent me out a heap of stuff late last year. Obviously, I haven't done a cast since then, but it would be remiss of me not to thank them and shout them out and recommend you go and have a look at their web store. They do amazing trays, and they've recently got this edition for moving your models around. It's like a little hook, I guess you'd say. You just pick it up at the back of the unit and you can move them around. That's fantastic. Similarly, Mithras Games, who are a mat making company out in New Zealand, were incredibly generous and sent me out some mats. We've been using them. We love them. They're fantastic. I will be purchasing a large supply of those mats for my events. I've got one coming up in August, and then a super major coming up in April next year, which I'll talk about in due course. But yeah, massive thanks to Mithras, and I would highly recommend you going and checking out their web store. And if you're in Australia or New Zealand, you'd be crazy not to get them, because the savings on the European Post, the savings savings you're getting versus the competitors, that alone, then the quality and the style is just a huge bonus. Danny paints. So Danny set up a YouTube. I think he was all guns blazing late last year, and has then had some work changes, which has made it a little bit more difficult for him to pump the content out. But I'd still recommend you go and have a look at the videos he's done so far and understand he's in the final stages of getting some more content out there. One of the motivating factors for me to do this episode was just to get it done before Danny does his. Then the Iron Gutsman Stu we spoke about from the team. He has a series of videos on YouTube where he delves into books. In some instances, like this current Skaven book, he does them on release, and then other times he goes back and does a bit of a retrospective once the dust has settled, and his stuff is really great. What you want to do is you want to watch one of Stu's videos, then you want to go to the Faction Facebook and see their minds explode as he unveils all of this tech in their book that they never knew existed. And then the final thing is just push for better. This is a thank you more so than anything else. I've been doing this charity event, which is around push-ups for better mental health. A number of Australians and obviously people across the world sadly commit suicide every year, and they have struggles with mental health, and it's just about promoting awareness of that, and it's also about putting some cash into that industry so that the professionals that work in that industry are able to better support people in crisis. And I'd really like to thank a couple of my mates who have dug deep in terms of just the support and the supporting and getting onto the messages. So I'll say a quick thanks to Ace and a quick thanks to Dan, who had been giving me updates. Tristan over in Canada, when I was crook with COVID, he was punching out a heap of push-ups for me from the other side of the world, and I'll tell you, it did bring a tear to the eye. So massive thanks to Ace, Dan, and Tristan. Those guys all really went above and beyond over the course of the month. So thank you. I guess I've got one last joke. This is for my boy Jacob Berry. How does Moses have his tea? He brews it.